Thanks for staying with Politics Tonight. 60 members of Nigeria's House of Representatives are seeking amendments to the 1999 Constitution to transition from the presidential to the parliamentary system of government. The lawmakers identified the need for reducing the cost of governance and robust policy debates, among others, as some of the reasons for demanding a return to the parliamentary system. And let's discuss this tonight. And joining me for this discussion is Professor of Political Institutions and Comparative Politics at the Department of Political Science of the Usmanu Danfodio University in Sokoto State, Professor Yahaya Tanko Baba. Prof, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to Politics Tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Right. So it's exactly a week since these lawmakers known as the Parliamentary Group in the House of Reps introduced a constitutional alteration bill setting in motion what could be a transition to the parliamentary system of government by 2031. If you compare these two systems of government and our current way of life, would you subscribe to this proposal?
Yeah, I think quite a number of issues are raised and 2-3 dimensions to understanding this new movement and the clamor and the agitation for a transition to yet another governance framework called the parliamentary system of government. You know, just like you said, this the issue of cost of governance is just one dimension to understanding why, you know, quite a number of people are advocating for a shift away from the presidential system of government because of the nature of the cost associated with running this, system of government. You know, it's a constitutional and institutional design that usually concentrate and allocate powers, you know, to the institution of the presidency. And not only that, this system of government is overbloated with, cabinet, extensive cabinets, aides, multiples of these aides that add unnecessarily to the cost of governance. Even the electoral process that actually established this system of government is itself costly. You know, when you talk about elections, that the president has to be directly elected, you know, by the people, by the electorate, you know, and that of course the cost of running campaigns, electioneering campaigns, you know, the cost, you know, of political parties, you know, running programs all across the country, and of course the excessive monetization of the political system itself calls for huge concerns in the country. By what it is, by the design and by the name, presidential as it is, you know, it concentrates all the powers. The president has the power to appoint his cabinet, he has the power to run the cabinet, he has the power to determine the policies, he has the power to implement the policy, he has the power to determine expenditure, he also has the power to run this expenditure. And of course, the parliament do also, or the legislature do play a role or a part in this process. But the whole essence of this move away from presidential system of government to parliamentary system of government is largely the demystification of the executive arrogance, you know, associated with presidential system of government. And of course, parliamentary as it is, you know, parliamentary system of government is built around the parliament, whereas the presidential system of government is built around the president. In parliamentary system of government, there is this principle of political collective responsibility. The parliament, there is this fusion of executive and legislative powers, and that the president or the head of government, so-called the prime minister or the premier, as it is referred to in other systems, is not directly elected by the electorate or by the mass of the people. Instead, you know, parties play the part of competing for elections during parliamentary elections, and the parties that actually have the majority of the seats, or parties that enter into coalition to produce the majority of the seats in the parliament, are responsible for appointing the prime minister. And the prime minister is responsible to the parliament, not the people. And you can now see a difference, even in our electoral system and electoral process, where you do not have to bear the burden of running presidential campaigns. What the parties will largely concentrate is to win the election in their own stronghold and ensure that they have significant number of votes to either form government, or enter into coalition alliance with smaller parties to form government and then distribute the spoils within the parliament and within the cabinet. Remember also, in the parliamentary system of government, cabinet members are also members of the parliament. So there is this fusion of functions of executive and legislative function. Is cost reducing when you talk about how the framework operates. Unlike what obtains in the presidential system of government, where policies are almost largely unilaterally determined by the president. And that explains why scholars, people and commentators argue that the presidential system of government is closer to zero-sum game nature of politics. Meaning that the party that wins the president, the individual that wins the presidency is overbearing, in terms of powers, in terms of influence, in terms of how the government itself is constituted and run. Unlike what obtains in the parliamentary system of government, where negotiations, dialogue, and consultations and talks between and among parties within the parliament, it leads to the formation of government. And once governments are formed, parties are actually responsible to run the government. Those who constitute the government within the parliament, and they constitute the cabinet within the parliament, and they determine the policies, and the policies are brought before the parliament for approval. And those parties that are not in the coalition, or those parties that have not won the majority of the seats within the parliament, constitute themselves as opposition parties and provide the necessary checks of the parties that actually form government. It is actually cost effective or cost efficient, if you like. It also reduces the tension of this stiff, fierce, confrontational electoral, competition. When it is election time, how this country is declared. How emergency periods just, evolve within the shortest possible time. I know everywhere is tense because the president will have to cover all the country, will have to win to third majority of states of votes, in addition to winning majority, and then you have too much money.
Prof, let me come in here. You've also identified some of the imperfections these lawmakers identified in that document. They talked about high cost of governance, leaving fewer resources for crucial areas like infrastructure, education, and healthcare. But then some have said, yes, it may reduce cost of government, but would it eradicate corruption?
Yeah, it's not sufficient enough to eradicate corruption. Corruption, is also another institutional matter that the government will have to develop capacity to fight it, and the society and other institutions in the society, the media, the civil society organizations, the general public will play their own part in the fight against corruption. But it will reduce, to a very large extent, the amount of resources that is required to run government itself. Largely because you do not have a separate cabinet from a separate parliament. Now, members of cabinet are members of the parliament. So you do not have ministers that are away from the parliament that will also have to run a system where they have multiple aides, where they have, a allocation of separate resources to run their office, separate from the parliament. And you also have to have parliamentarians also to be made, provision to also be made with special budgetary, allocations to run the parliament. So when you have this fusion of functions, then it actually reduces the rate at which the government machineries actually consume the resources in the way in which they are managed. Remember also, away from this very particular debate of cost of governance, there is this growing ascendancy of ethnic nationalities for autonomy, regional autonomy, where the presidential system of government provides little, space for that very particular autonomous, existence of certain subnationals, of the country. We knew what actually failed under the First Republic, where regional governments were substantially autonomous, from the central government, and that, of course, if you look at the division of powers and of jurisdictions amongst the levels of government, you will see that the regional governments or the subnational governments actually take the greater parts of governance process, whereas the central government is actually left with a few exclusive lists, if you like, security, defense, currency, foreign policy, and so on and so forth.
Yeah,
but if you look at the tension in the country,
since this matter came up, there have been several reactions. Some analysts have argued that Our problem is the implementation of our policies and laws and not the system of government. I mean, if we implement our laws in the interest of Nigerians, do you not agree that we may get it right, irrespective of the kind of system we practice?
Yeah, when you talk about implementation, the system design, the institutional design, and the constitutional design play a huge part too. The system determines how government and societies are run. Even when we have this very particular challenge of implementing, our policies, our programs, or enforcement of the laws, or the rule of law, if you like. The American democracy is one most perfect democracy, of course, because of the nations adherence to existing laws, existing principles, existing rules and regulations. But then, even in American society, you come to realize that this concentration of powers with the president is one limitations that have been advocated by scholars to say that the president usually overtly control the affairs of the country, even though the Congress in America is as powerful as the presidency, is a co-equal institution of government. But in Nigeria and in other emerging democracies where we are struggling with institutionalization, process of institutionalization, the presidential system of government is seen as one burden on countries that are struggling to actually consolidate or sustain their democratic framework. But the parliamentary system of government, is seen to be something, a system that is fairly well better for a system, for a society that is a bit fragile, like that of Nigeria. These agitations for state police, these agitations for restructuring, this agitation for fiscal federalism, all emanates from the enormous powers that are allocated to the office of the president. Remember, the president do not only have formal powers, even formal powers are abused. We know how the presidency usually determine, influence, and interfere even with the activities of the legislature, when the legislature under presidential system of government is supposed to be an independent, co-equal institution of government. We know how, even since 1999, we just had a background of Galina Abba, the nightmare the Galina Abba-led leadership of the House of Representatives had with the then President Obasanjo, who was acting as a near maximum ruler because of the enormous, constitutional powers he has and the abuse of the powers, if you like.
All right. But with all of the imperfections associated with the presidential system of government and those identified in that document, it looks like the cost of governance is the big issue, or is the biggest issue here. And agreeably, this conversation about making drastic cuts in the cost of governance, reduce the deficits and strengthen the economic fundamentals of the country didn't start today. For you, where do we begin from?
Yeah, I think this is a very valid argument. This is an argument that every Nigerian, given the crisis, the economic crisis, and the deep divisions that actually exist between and across different divides in Nigeria, this is a valid argument to say that more resources need to be freed for development. More resources need to be available to fix the economy, to fix the basic infrastructure, to attend to the basic facilities and amenities that will have direct and decisive impact on the general well-being of the people. But the issue, of course, of governance is just one dimension. Remember, there is also tension in the country. The country is well divided. More than ever before now. This agitations for self-determination is hovering in the southeast. This call, for restructuring of the country, we have had two different conferences, political, sovereign, if you call them conferences, with outcomes that are yet to be implemented. People are still not satisfied with the way in which this country is organized. And of course, the parliamentary system of government is just one, if you like, political therapy to the deep political crisis the country is actually on the way. The security concerns, of the country. We talk about the state police. Now the government, the central government, is well overburdened, is unable to attend to the basic needs of the people, which is security. The military drafted into internal security, which is not their business. The abuses, the waste and of the resources in the name of the cover of security and the continuing deterioration of the security situation, the food security issue. These are all issues that divide Nigerians the more. And of course, part of the argument is that, the president takes it all. The president decides what will happen at the end of the day. And so be it also at subnational level, it's even worse at the state level. When you have at the federal level, the legislature increasingly becoming assertive and asking questions, and restraining the presidency and the executive arm of government on matters of national concerns. What we have in the subnational level and the state level is that we have, pseudo autocrats as governors in the state level, because most of the state government or state assemblies are usually one-party dominant state assemblies, largely sponsored by the governors or the godfathers who really ask questions. Prof. And of course, and this creates a lot of problems for the country and for the democracy and even for the development of the country.
Absolutely.